What's up, Midtown? Pastor Bob here. I'm with some of my best friends and family here, and we're having a little conversation about Latin American Heritage Month. First of all, Latin Americans are the fastest growing population in the United States of America today. They make up over 20% of the population, so they're a huge force culturally, economically, politically, etc. And so we thought we'd have a little conversation and chop it up here about Latin American history, future, what holds for everyone. And I thought we'd start off with, because you guys are some of the best representation of the community, start off with a little bit about who you are, your background, and how that has kind of played into what you're doing now.
Sure, I'll start. I am the children's director at our Elk Grove location. A little bit about my background. Grew up with a really strong single mama who held it down. Our house was provided for, worked really hard, multiple jobs. And so that's kind of my background and how I grew up. Yep.
Gilbert Esvito, family pastor at Midtown Church. I'm the product of a Puerto Rican mother from San Juan, Puerto Rico, and a Mexican dad from Inglewood. Yeah, hardworking family. I learned a lot of my grit and my hard work ethic from my parents who modeled, we could do anything together as a family unit.
Susie, you're actually Latinx through marriage, so you got to give a little bit about your background.
Well, I say this. I say I'm Korean by heritage, Canadian by birth, Mexican by marriage, and American by immigration. So let me pass it off to my Mexican by marriage.
Yeah, so Mexicans are mestizos. We're mixed, right? So Spaniard, indigenous. So I've been told to speak in tweets, not blogs, and that's it.
That's good. That next beautiful woman next to you is my wife, and so I guess I got a little Latin in me through marriage as well. But,
yes,
tell them who
do.
You are.
Yes, you do. My real name is Maria Leticia Guzman Balian, a.k.a. Letty Balian. I came to the U.S. at the age of 10. Came from very... traditional and non-traditional parents. It was very important for my parents to have a good education. We came from a background of families that really wanted us to succeed, business background. And I married an Armenian, and now he's actually Mexican, because when I first met him, I thought he spoke Spanish because he recited some really cool phrases that I said, my goodness, I think he's Latin, Mexican. What are you?
And next to you is our beautiful daughter, Tim.
Yes.
Yes, I am Taylor Balian. My mother is Mexican. My father is Bob Balian. Grew up with a very strong Mexican culture within our family. I feel like our family did a really good job of keeping tradition alive. We do speak Spanish with that side of the family, so helping keep language alive. And my Mexican identity is something that I strongly define, or strongly defines me.
And going back to our family, it was super important for my dad and my mom and dad, that we kept the Spanish speaking going. So here we are.
So for our family growing up, there was a sense of learning English without an accent. Yeah. But what we couldn't get behind or beyond was still the sort of adjacency to being indigenous, because the way in which we still looked, right? And so I think, historically there's been some in the Latino area, specifically Mexican, that have wanted to assimilate but got rejected. And in that also, there was a resistance that came up, right? That was the Chicano movement. And it was this movement toward maintaining one's cultural identity and not assimilating toward, white supremacy and white dominance.
I know, because they're family, I know how it was for them at some level. But Gilbert, what about you guys in terms of just parents that kind of wanted to embrace the culture or downplay it a little bit?
Mine was a little interesting. So both of my parents are from Mexico, and so my mom pretty much came middle school, high school time, and I remember stories that she would tell me. She's like, "Oh yeah, if we spoke Spanish, they would pick on us." She's like, "I got in a fight just for speaking to my sister in Spanish." And so in the home, she really made sure that we knew our language, our food, our culture. But she made it very clear that when we are at school, when we are in public that we are American, we don't speak Spanish. You know, this is the way it is.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of tension. Like you practice the art of being a chameleon. Being Mexican Puerto Rican, I mean, you had festivals that you couldn't go to because you were half the other. You know, so you couldn't rock with just the Puerto Ricans because you weren't Puerto Rican enough. You couldn't rock with just the Mexicans because you weren't Mexican enough. So it was like, for me growing up, I was tapping into a lot of Chicano culture, like Chicano art, Chicano writing, Chicano music, Chicano cars, like that. I found through art I could express and find myself as a Latino through Chicano art, because I think Chicano art was more acceptable to the different expressions of the Latin community. A lot of dancing on the Puerto Rican side. Yeah, these hips don't lie, okay? My parents did a good job of celebrating the expressions of the culture, but also did a great job of celebrating the many other cultures. So at our dinner table, there was always a bunch of different types of people from different places. And I think through that, I found the safety of that tension that maybe outside, because I wasn't also American enough.
So September 15th through October 15th has been deemed, the terms are ever evolving, but Hispanic Heritage Month, Latinx Heritage Month, Latin History Month. How do you refer to it, and how do you feel about it? And do you do anything to recognize or celebrate it?
Like, I am happy that it's being recognized. I think it's nice to be able to set aside a moment within the year to celebrate Latin heritage. And so, yeah, as far as, you know, celebrations, it's something that I guess has been newly adopted, at least in my life. And so there's nothing that I really do within the month to celebrate myself. And it is cool to see how many people are celebrating this month now, because it has gotten so much notoriety.
Just a little history. So El Grito, which means the eve of Mexican Independence Day, is actually September 15th. So that's like a big deal. And maybe that's why they adapted day, meaning, you know, commercialism, for September 15th. So the Mexican Independence Day is not Cinco de Mayo, so everybody will know.
Write it down.
Write it down if you don't know this. Is September 16th. September 16th is Mexican Independence Day.
And then also I would say this sense of like honoring the activists and the people who work so hard to actually establish this month. And so on one hand, yeah, you could say it was government appeasement or whatnot, but they wouldn't have done it if they weren't sort of forerunners, activists, people fighting for something like this to take place. Brings about a sense of freedom to say, okay, cool, even if, you know, there may be some inauthentic sort of, you know, marketing around it, I think there is some good that's also happening.
Doubt, no question.
Like creating authentic pathways for Latino leaders is important to me, because I know, like, we may be celebrated on a screen or on a billboard, but they don't know the names of those people in that picture. You know, believe that I could. So as an artist, as a creative, let's say that way, it's the same thing. You know, my uncle, Chris Montez, has been doing music, still does music, and he was around the time where, you know, Richie Valens and the Beach Boys and all those guys were blowing up in the Hawthorne area and everything. And but he couldn't sit inside during music, you know, recordings. He had to sit outside. So like it's always like, yeah, you celebrate him because he gets you to dance, but what about the art he produced and what he instilled, right? You know, so I've always internally, I'm a justice guy. So I'm always looking at that picture and going, man, did they know their story though? Like, I want to know more behind it. So like, I think in celebrating people, there's a level of honor, not just like, I could celebrate anything, but if there's no honor in it and it doesn't really recognize the story, the struggle, identifying people who started before, I'm really kind of iffy about it.
Annette, your family and their take on
No, you know what? I'm like, I am Mexican every day.
Hey, órale.
You know, year after year, we eat tacos, arroz. We know, we listen to the music. We live the Latin life. So we don't do anything extra special. But I think, although it's not a perfect month, and you know, but I'm like, okay, but it is a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
We are highlighting, you know, some Latinos. We are paving the way to honoring and respecting and, you know, giving credit where credit is due. And so
One of my dreams is to, as we know, California has now reach over 40% population Latino. And a lot of Latinos in California, Arizona, primarily California, because it's so agricultural. We get a lot of migrant workers who just work their behinds off to serve us this beautiful, awesome bounty of fruit and vegetables that we have.
Yeah.
You know, they have, and they need to be highlighted and appreciated. For what they do and what they've done and continue to do. So so we'll see more developments through Midtown to try to help the migrant community because it is very, very much endearing to my heart.
And I think what's beautiful about Latino culture is, as well as I think where organizations have gotten it wrong, is it's limited to a certain shade of brown too. My grandmother from Puerto Rico is black, but she's Latina.
Yeah.
And our brothers and sisters Afro-Latino. So it's like we have this. There's so much culture, and our palette is wide.
Yeah.
There's so many shades of brown.
Yeah.
There's dark brown. And I've seen it just in my family. I don't think we've got it right with honoring all of it. I think we're getting there. It's full and beautiful.
Well, one of the things that really sort of is a big like nails on the board for me is when they identify or they'll say, "Well, you don't look Mexican," or
What does
like
that mean?
I'm like, or like, "Oh, she looks more Mexican," and I was like, "How are you identifying?" What Mexican is. So they don't see the beauty of the multicultural people that we have, just like we do have here in the U.S. It's a lot more cosmopolitan than you guys think. We have the responsibility to teach them, it's just teaching them who we are, what sort of a rainbow of colors we come from, and culture. And not every person, not every Mexican that's in California, U.S. is a migrant person. I mean, that's the other stigma too, that not every Mexican is, speak Spanish, or or like is underfunded, or like is low income. That's or undereducated. So.
You were going to ask something that was touching on some
Right,
of that
you guys
stuff.
already went there. But I'll start with this question, because I was going to talk about colorism within the Latin, But how have you, I know it's a big question, but how have you personally experienced some marginalization or just flat out racism that you can attribute to because of your Latin heritage?
Yeah.
How many of you guys have heard this statement? Like, well, not you, but them. Right?
Yes.
It's the whole that one. I'm like, whoa, let's talk about who them is first of all. And I'm not like them. What is that? I think in the workplace, in the school is different. At our high school, what up, Hawthorne? We were so diverse. So I think everyone, what sucked about it is there was times and seasons where it was like a prison yard where everyone was forced to separate. There was a group of us, mainly the football team, that chose not to do that. And we just united together, which was special. But at school, there was a lot of segregation. Coming up here, I've experienced several things. Students, young people, saying things that you know they didn't learn from watching TV. They probably learned at home. Flexing their intellectual fortitude, thinking that you were just a migrant product, yard worker. So I have many. Unfortunately, I have many. I think it's interesting though, is I'm not shocked because my family before me, it's the same thing. So it was like a lot of what they experienced, wishing I wouldn't experience, but you end up experiencing it. This one story though, I was at a church camp, and my peer group, they asked the question, how many of you guys are in the honor roll? And I went up there. I was one of the only Latinos at the camp. And I went up there because I was. And no joke, everybody there, dang, it still hits me a little bit, is they were like, what are you doing up here? And I was like, because I'm on the honor roll. And they were like, you're on the honor roll? And I was like, yeah. So I remember feeling the weight of looking different attributed to what I could be intellectually.
Sometimes I walk in the store and they're talking in Spanish and they think I'm not Latina and they're, saying bad things about me. And then I'm like, so it is a battle where it's like, you want to be light. It's looked like, oh my gosh. But at the same time, when you're lighter, you're not Mexican enough. You're not American enough. You're not, whatever the comparison is. So, but yeah, it's even your own people.
And for our kids, so at their ages, because our kids are similar in age, like even representation in movies and media has been so nice because, the Encantos, the Cocos, like they're like the kids are going, wait, that's kind of like my dad's family. Right. Or that's for you. And they actually get to celebrate it, where for us growing up, it was like, if they had a station or something on there, right? Like there was no, so it's nice to see, like in their world at least, they can tap into something where they can celebrate some of the people that look like us.
In a positive way.
In a positive light.
Right.
Yeah, so it's very.
Okay, so coming here at 10, 11 years old, and going to a school filled with primarily white folks, but so it was a very multicultural sort of setting, but I didn't see them as like you're black, you're East Indian, you're Mexican or whatever, right? Because I had no idea. I never experienced that before coming in from Mexico. I remember this kid, it was raining and it was, how after Christmas you get your favorite coats or your new coats that you wear and then you show them off or whatever after you come back from Christmas break. So I remember everybody that knows me, I'm a fashionista. I was a fashionista back then. So I begged my mom to buy me a beautiful jacket with a hood that had fur around it. And I thought I was the cutest thing, so it was raining. And I remember this annoying kid used to call me names, but I had no idea what they meant. So he used to say, hey, Beaner. And I was like, Beaner? Hey, wetback. I'm like, what do they mean by that? I had no idea, right? And so we were waiting in line, getting ready to go back to our classroom, and it was raining, so he pushed me and he said, hey, who did your dad had to, or how much money did your dad had to steal to buy that coat for you? And to me, I was like, what is he talking about? Steal, right? But what really set me off was that he pushed me and my fur coat got wet. So, long story short, I was suspended because I beat the kid up.
You handle business.
I handled my business. So I told my dad, I said, Dad, this is the reason why I got in a fight with this kid. And he says, good for you, honey. Good for you. You need to defend yourself and you need to let him know that you are no. And I was like, what does he mean by the name calling? And he explained to me why they were calling, why the beaners are called beaners and why wetbacks are called wetbacks. And I was like, well, that's kind of mean. So that was my first time ever to know that about racism.
It's such a fired up comment, obviously, because regardless if you're Mexican or not, you get lumped in with Mexicans if you're brown, right, and you're Latin. But I think for me, what's been hurtful is that there's been multiple lived experiences where I've been made to feel threatening to white women in work establishments. And so such that, white males are watching my interaction with white females and how I'm making them feel safe or unsafe, right? And I think a lot of times racism in this country, especially and around the world, has manifested itself in such a way that whoever is the targeted group, the men are made to be perceived as violent, rapists, sort of sexual predators. And that has made its way and has been here toward Latin men for quite some time, and it still persists, right? And so, again, these multiple scenarios where Mexicans, Latins are made to be viewed a certain way. And so my question is, how do we redeem that space? How do we come knowing that, let me pay attention, there is a narrative. Again, if it's not targeting you, you probably won't pay attention or be leery of it. But if you are in that camp, you'll notice it. And so my question is, how do we come alongside different narratives that are there, not just with Latins, but with other people groups, and say, hey, help me understand narrative that you're battling, and how can I be an ally and a support to you to battle that lie?
I think too, it's we have, like, one of the things I've been challenging my brain is, like, man, what's the source of the narrative? And I think it's also like the sources of media, the sources of resource and books they're reading in schools. Like, even for my kids, I'm having them watch documentaries with me about people of influence and that are of color and of different cultures that they're used to seeing. I think it's the control of information. So like Marcos was saying, is like, there is a responsibility for us, and Letty, you said this too, about how to teach. And I think that's where it gets hard, is because it's like, okay, so once a month we do this thing, and then we move on to business as usual. So it's kind of going, what can we do monthly that is intentional, that helps paint the true narrative of who we are, where we're from, and what we're about, which is very challenging in a world that's controlled in media and art and what's allowed and what's not.
I know Susie had another 3 or 4 questions. I have a million. We should probably do part 2 of this, because we probably need to wrap this up, but there's way too much that we left on the table. So I want to thank all of you. You guys were a wealth of information, and you're all beautiful too. I want to thank our people in Midtown. Midtown, first of all, the Latinx community is a huge part of our country, but the Latinx community is a huge part of our church. And so we love you, want to affirm you, and we want to talk about this more. So God bless you. We'll do this again soon, and we'll talk
bless
to you soon.
Midtown.
Where we get down.